Daniel Jameson sat in his office, high above the bustling streets of New York City. At 53, he had it all. A sprawling penthouse, a private yacht, luxury cars, and a successful tech empire, Jameson Technologies, that revolutionized the way the world connected. His company had grown exponentially over the years, making him one of the richest men on the planet. Yet, despite his fame and fortune, Daniel felt a profound emptiness in his life that no amount of wealth could fill. The morning sun shone brightly, reflecting off the sleek glass exterior of his towering office building, casting colorful patterns across the city below. Yet inside the high-rise, the ambience was cold, sterile. The walls, adorned with abstract art, only seemed to accentuate the isolation he felt. Daniel had meticulously built his empire, focusing on growth, innovation, and profit. But what had he gained in return? A career that consumed every waking hour, leaving little time for anything else. His assistant, Victoria Lane, a sharp and efficient woman in her early 40s, entered the office, interrupting his contemplations. "Mr. Jameson," she began, her voice breaking the silence, "the Tokyo investors are on the line, and your meeting with the board is in 30 minutes. Will you be attending the charity event tonight?" Daniel didn't respond immediately, lost in thought. His eyes gazed out at the city below, the concrete jungle that he had conquered but never truly felt part of. Victoria's voice broke through again, this time more insistent. "You also have the event for Harper Orphanage tomorrow. They are requesting your presence." He sighed, glancing at her. "Tell them I'll be there," Daniel muttered. His voice, though calm, betrayed the growing sense of reluctance. Charity events were a regular part of his schedule, a tax-friendly activity that allowed him to maintain his polished public image. He had always done them out of obligation, never out of genuine desire. After all, what did it matter? Helping children in need wasn't going to change his life. What was it to him, really? Victoria hesitated, sensing his discomfort. "Mr. Jameson, if I may." Daniel cut her off, his voice colder now. "Victoria, I don't have time for speeches and handshakes. Just reschedule the afternoon meeting and send the investors my approval for the new deal. Let's move forward, as usual." With a nod, she left, and Daniel returned to staring out of his office windows, his mind swirling with thoughts he couldn't escape. What had he truly built? Was his life defined by the board meetings, the conference calls, the endless pursuit of more wealth? He had everything he could ever want, except for the one thing that mattered most: connection. As the day wore on, Daniel's unease only grew. The events of the morning had left him unsettled. He had been raised to believe that success and wealth were the ultimate goals, the markers of a fulfilling life. But now, at 53, he found himself questioning everything. The loneliness that followed him home every night was becoming harder to ignore. He had no family, no friends to lean on, and no one to share his triumphs or failures with. His wealth had built walls around him, but it hadn't protected him from the isolation that came with it. That evening, as he prepared to leave the office, he glanced once more at the cold, impersonal walls of his penthouse. No photos, no family pictures, no memories of laughter or love. He had always prided himself on his independence, but now it felt like an empty void. He walked to the elevator, his footsteps echoing in the hollow silence of the building. The ride back to his mansion in Westchester was just as lonely. The car glided through the quiet streets, the headlights illuminating the night as he sat in the back, lost in thought. His mansion, once a symbol of success, felt more like a tomb. The large, grand entryway greeted him with cold, lifeless silence. The staff had long since left for the night, and the only sound was the faint echo of his footsteps as he entered the living room, a vast space that had never hosted a real family dinner. He sat alone at the grand table, the empty chairs mocking him. Dinner was a solitary affair, just him and the cold, distant walls of his mansion. Even the grand fireplace, a centerpiece of the room, failed to provide any warmth. It was as if the house itself reflected the emptiness he felt inside. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the smooth amber liquid filling the glass, but even that offered no comfort. As the night stretched on, Daniel sat alone in his study, the one room in the mansion that felt somewhat familiar. It was lined with bookshelves filled with business books, historical texts, and accolades he had earned over the years. Yet even here, surrounded by the accomplishments of his career, he felt no sense of fulfillment. His eyes drifted over to a small, dusty photo frame on the corner of his desk. It was a picture of a young woman, Rebecca Winters. The face smiled back at him, reminding him of a time before his empire had consumed him, a time when he was happy. Rebecca had been his college sweetheart, someone he had loved deeply, but who had disappeared from his life without a word. The last he had heard from her was a brief note saying she couldn't be with him anymore. It had shattered him, and he had thrown himself into his work, determined to never look back. But as he gazed at her photograph now, a pang of regret washed over him. He had built an empire, but at what cost? In that moment, Daniel realized something he had been avoiding for years. Despite all his wealth and success, something was missing. He had never found the love and connection he had once hoped for, and now, at 53, he was realizing that he might never find it. The emptiness in his mansion, in his heart, was becoming unbearable. The next day, as he prepared to attend the charity event for Harper Orphanage, Daniel found himself thinking about Rebecca and the life he could have had. The children at the orphanage, Anna, Leo, Mita, and Ethan, were just a reminder of what he had missed. But little did he know, this event would change everything. The children would unknowingly become the family he had been searching for all along. The following evening, Daniel Jameson found himself stepping out of the black Bentley in front of Harper Orphanage, the same orphanage he had reluctantly agreed to support. The building, a weathered structure of brick and peeling paint, sat quietly in the shadow of the towering skyscrapers that dotted the city. The contrast between the sleek modernity of his world and the neglected simplicity of the orphanage struck him, but he brushed it aside. He had a duty to fulfill. "Mr. Jameson, welcome," greeted Mrs. Porter, the orphanage director, with a warm yet tired smile. Her gray-streaked hair and kind eyes were the opposite of the cold corporate world Daniel was used to. She ushered him inside, where the faint sounds of children's chatter echoed in the hallway. The space, though modest, had a certain charm, a reflection of the love and care the staff poured into it despite limited resources. As they entered the main room, Daniel's eyes swept over the children. There were about 30 of them, sitting cross-legged on the floor, their faces a mixture of curiosity and polite expectancy. He felt the usual discomfort in the air, the forced smiles, the polite nods, and the shallow pleasantries exchanged between him and the children. These events had always felt like a formality, a performance for the cameras and the charity donors. He had never truly connected with the faces that flashed by in these events. But tonight, something felt different. "Thank you for joining us," Mrs. Porter said, gesturing to the children who had quieted down at her instruction. "The children are excited to meet you. They'd been asking a lot of questions about your company." Daniel nodded, his professional smile firmly in place. "It's my pleasure," he replied, though his voice lacked the usual enthusiasm. He gave his speech, words about community responsibility and investing in the future flowing smoothly from his lips. He presented an oversized check with his customary media smile, but deep inside, he felt the familiar sense of emptiness. He was here, playing his part in the performance, but something nagged at him. Just as he was about to step back, Mrs. Porter hesitated. "Mr. Jameson, would you like a tour of the facility? The children would appreciate it." At first, Daniel was about to decline, knowing how tight his schedule was. But something about her earnest request made him pause. He glanced at the children again, their wide eyes watching him. For a moment, he considered the possibility of actually engaging with them, seeing them not as a backdrop for his charitable image, but as real individuals with real stories. He surprised himself by saying, "Yes, a tour sounds good." Mrs. Porter looked pleased, but slightly taken aback. She led him down the hallway, where the walls were decorated with childlike drawings and colorful banners. The sight was a stark contrast to the polished, impersonal spaces he was used to. They stopped at a small room at the end of the hall, labeled Special Projects. Mrs. Porter opened the door, revealing 4 children sitting quietly at desks, working on various tasks. "These are our special cases," she explained softly. "Anna, Leo, Mia, and Ethan. They've been here the longest." Daniel's eyes immediately landed on the girl sitting at the desk. Anna, the oldest of the group, was focused on her work, her brow furrowed in concentration. The other children, Leo, Mia, and Ethan, were busy with their own projects, but it was Anna who caught his attention. She was different from the others. She wasn't smiling or looking at him with the forced curiosity he had seen in the others. Instead, she had a quiet strength in her demeanor, a confidence that seemed out of place in the sterile environment of the orphanage. "Why aren't they at the presentation?" Daniel asked, his voice unconsciously softer than usual. Mrs. Porter hesitated before responding. "Anna has anxiety in crowds," she explained gently. "And the others? Well, they are a package deal. Anna refuses to be separated from her siblings. They've been through a lot together, and it makes placement difficult." The words hit Daniel harder than he expected. He had always viewed charity events as an obligation, a way to polish his public image, but now, standing in this small room with these children, something in him stirred. He looked at their faces. Each of them had a story, a background filled with hardship, yet here they were, fighting to stay together. Leo, a 10-year-old boy with inquisitive eyes, glanced up at him and asked bluntly, "Why do you care about us?" Daniel was caught off guard by the question. Most children would ask about his wealth or his company, but not Leo. There was a raw honesty in the question that stung Daniel more than he expected. It wasn't about charity. It wasn't about saving them. It was simply about why he, a billionaire CEO, cared about children like them. Before he could respond, Mia, the youngest, walked up to him, holding out a drawing she had been working on. It was a colorful picture of a family, a father figure standing in the center, surrounded by children. Her eyes were wide with innocence as she looked up at him. "It's not finished," she said softly. "I can't get the daddy part right." Daniel looked at the drawing. The simplicity of it struck him. It wasn't about perfection or wealth. It was about the connection, the desire for belonging. He reached out and took the drawing, feeling an overwhelming rush of emotions he wasn't prepared for. "Thank you, Mia," he said quietly, his voice softer than he intended. As he stood there, holding the picture, something inside him shifted. For the first time, he wasn't just the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation. He wasn't just the man people saw on billboards or in newspapers. He was a human being, and these children were reaching something deep within him, something that had been dormant for too long. "Mrs. Porter," Daniel said, his voice steadier now, "I'd like to discuss adoption options." It was an impulsive decision, one that surprised even him. But in that moment, standing in that room, surrounded by children who had been abandoned by the world, Daniel knew that this was the beginning of something that would change his life forever. This wasn't about charity anymore. This was about family. As he left the orphanage that night, the cold, empty mansion he was returning to seemed far more distant than it ever had before. Something had been awakened inside him, and it wasn't going to go away. The children had planted a seed, and now Daniel was determined to see it grow. 2 weeks had passed since Daniel made the impulsive decision to adopt Anna, Leo, Mia, and Ethan. The transformation of his mansion had already begun. The once sterile and minimalist environment was starting to come alive with color and warmth. Where there were once cold, marble floors and empty, cavernous spaces, now there were signs of life. Bright rugs scattered across the hardwood floors, a wall covered in children's artwork, and the faint hum of laughter that Daniel hadn't heard in years. It wasn't just the mansion that was changing. Daniel himself was undergoing a transformation. The once work-obsessed CEO, who had spent countless nights poring over spreadsheets and profit margins, now found himself scheduling time for school pickups, doctor visits, and even bedtime stories. He had always been driven by ambition, but this new role he had taken on felt like something he wasn't fully prepared for, yet something he desperately needed. The first few days were the hardest. Daniel had no idea how to be a father. Fact, but stronger than ever. Months passed, and the Jameson household, once cold and empty, was now a vibrant, chaotic, and undeniably real family. Daniel had slowly but surely adapted to his new life as a father. The mansion, once a mere showpiece of wealth, had transformed into a home filled with laughter, arguments over dinner, late-night homework sessions, and a constant hum of activity. Yet even as Daniel embraced his new role, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Something he couldn't quite name, but which gnawed at him in quiet moments. It was on a chilly autumn afternoon, as the family sat together in the living room, that the unexpected truth finally came to light. Daniel had just come in from a morning business meeting, his mind preoccupied with negotiations that seemed far less significant than they had months ago. He had learned to balance his work with his family life, but as always, the demands of his company pulled at him. "Where's Ethan?" Daniel asked, noticing the boy was missing from the group. Leo, who had become his unofficial assistant in the house, looked up from his book, furrowing his brows. "I think he's in his room," Leo replied, distracted by a complex math problem in front of him. "He's been reading those old history books all day." Daniel nodded, thinking nothing of it. Ethan had always been a quiet, introspective child. Despite his initial withdrawal, he had gradually opened up over the past months. But he still spent most of his time alone, especially when it came to studying. Daniel had come to understand that it was Ethan's way of coping with the overwhelming changes in his life. He decided to check on him. As he climbed the stairs to Ethan's room, he felt a faint sense of dread. It had been a while since he had spent any one-on-one time with Ethan, and the boy's recent withdrawn behavior had been subtle enough to raise concern. When he opened the door, he found Ethan sitting on the floor, his back against the bed, surrounded by a small pile of old, yellowed papers. The boy's eyes were focused on a faded family album, one Daniel hadn't seen in years. It was the album that contained the only picture he had of his own parents, a simple image of his mother and father from when he was young. But there, among the pages, something caught Daniel's eye. A familiar name, Rebecca Winters. Ethan looked up as Daniel entered, his face conflicted. "I found this in the attic," Ethan said quietly, holding up the album. I didn't know she was connected to us." Daniel's heart stopped for a moment. The album, which he had shoved away and forgotten about all those years ago, had resurfaced. But how could Ethan know about Rebecca? And why was it now in his hands? "I don't understand," Daniel said, his voice trembling slightly. "Where did you find that?" Ethan stood, his face tense. "In the attic. There were a lot of boxes with old stuff you never looked at. I thought it was just junk. But then I found this, and some other papers. They have your name on them. And Rebecca Winters." Rebecca Winters. The name echoed through Daniel's mind like a distant memory coming to life. She had been his college sweetheart, the love he had lost, the woman who had disappeared from his life without explanation, the woman he had never stopped thinking about, no matter how successful he became. Ethan looked up at Daniel, his eyes full of confusion and concern. "Who is she, Dad? Why do we have her things? I thought you said we didn't know our real parents." Daniel's mind raced. The sudden rush of emotions and unanswered questions made him feel as though the ground was shifting beneath his feet. He had never expected this, never imagined the truth would surface in such an unexpected way. For years, he had kept his past locked away, never discussing Rebecca or the questions surrounding their separation. But now Ethan, his son, was standing in front of him, holding the answers Daniel had long buried. He stepped forward, taking the album from Ethan's hands. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages. And then he saw it. His own face, young and full of ambition, beside Rebecca's smiling face. The picture had been taken just before their lives had taken different paths, before she had disappeared without a trace. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. Rebecca was the mother of his children. The shock was too much to process all at once. He sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding the album. Ethan sat beside him, watching him with wide eyes, waiting for an explanation. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Ethan, His voice faltered. How could he explain this? How could he possibly explain to the child he had only recently adopted that the mother of these children, the very woman who had left him years ago, was, in fact, the biological mother of these 4 siblings? "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse. "I never told you the truth about your mother, Rebecca. She was someone I loved very much. But she left me before we had the chance to build a life together. She left because she thought it would be too much for me. She had us." Ethan's eyes widened as the realization sank in. "So, we're really your kids, like biologically?" Daniel nodded, his heart heavy with emotion. "Yes, you're my children. Not just in the way I chose to adopt you, but by blood. All 4 of you." The room felt suddenly smaller, and Daniel felt as if the world had shifted beneath him. The truth, which had been hidden for so long, was now laid bare, and it was a truth that shook him to his very core. He had spent years believing he was alone in the world, that his wealth and success were all that mattered. But now, everything had changed. These children, who he had come to love so deeply, were his own flesh and blood. Children he never knew he had, but who had always been meant to be part of his life. Ethan sat in silence, processing the words. Slowly, he stood up, a look of understanding crossing his face. You didn't know until now." Daniel stood, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. "No, Ethan, I didn't know, but now I do. And I'm not going to let anything change that. You and your siblings, you're my family. And nothing in the world is going to take that away." The gravity of the moment hung in the air. Daniel, once so certain of his place in the world, now faced a reality he had never anticipated. But as he looked at Ethan and thought of Anna, Leo, and Mia, he knew one thing for certain. His life had led him here, to this moment, to this family. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would fight for them. For the family he had always unknowingly needed. The unexpected truth had shaken everything, but it also solidified something far more important. The bond between them was unbreakable.